On to London, Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, Geneva, Vienna, Budapest, and Prague. On to the Soviet Union, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. At the Salzburg Festival in Austria, Arturo Toscanini, the world's most celebrated conductor, attended my recital. Afterwards, the maestro came backstage and in front of a large group of strangers, threw his arms around me and said, "No! Oh, no. Oh. You have a voice. You have a voice heard once in 100 years. Now, I do love Italian men, but I have to admit they make me a bit nervous. In one 10-month period, I gave over 123 concerts in 15 different countries, with a repertoire that included over 200 songs and arias that I taught myself to sing in 12 different languages. I was beginning to feel a bit worn, more than a bit tired, and missing my mama more than I can tell. So, on a cold winter's day in 1935, I set sail for America. It was very good to be home again. A national tour of my own country, coast to coast, and in the late 1930s, through the miracle of radio, I was singing in living rooms across the land. In 1936, the First Lady, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, invited me to sing at the White House. Mother and I took the train from Philadelphia to Washington, and I sang for the President and Mrs. Roosevelt and their guests. Afterwards, Mrs. Roosevelt took me aside, and I was just about to comment on what a lovely home she had, when the First Lady said to me, "Marian, the President would very much like to meet your mother. Do you think Miss Anderson could spare a moment or two?" "Well," I said, "I'm not certain of my mother's plans for the evening, Mrs. Roosevelt, but it wouldn't hurt to ask." So I stepped to the side and watched as Anna Anderson, a retired cleaning lady from South Philadelphia and the most remarkable woman I'd ever known, made her way to the Oval Office to have a chat with the President of the United States. While in Washington, I was asked to perform on program for Howard University. I was proud and delighted to perform for one of the finest Negro colleges in America. The concert was to be held at Constitution Hall, the home of the National Symphony Orchestra and the Washington Opera, and within direct sight of the White House and the Lincoln Memorial. I was secretly thrilled at the thought. While I was back at home in Philadelphia, I got a phone call from Saul Hurock, my dear friend and concert manager. "Marian," he said, "we have a little problem." Constitution Hall was owned by the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. And apparently the daughters had a policy regarding their hall that bore very little resemblance to the magnificent and remarkable document that had given the hall its name. Constitution Hall, the pride of our nation's capital, did not admit Negroes. Marian Anderson, whose voice might be acclaimed in the music capitals of the world as a voice never to be heard again for another 100 years. But it was a voice that was not going to be heard in Constitution Hall anytime soon. I set off on a national tour. I was still an American, regardless of policy. I was determined to put the entire event behind me. But the entire event would not stay put. It grew day by day, making me a quite controversial figure. Howard University was threatening legal action, and editorials appeared in the paper daily. We must hear Marian Anderson. Prejudice rules to make our nation's capital ridiculous in the eyes of all cultured peoples. My most recent and gracious hostess, whose immediate ancestors had fought in the Revolutionary War that freed our young nation, was unsparing with her fellow daughters. You have been given an opportunity to lead this country in an enlightened way, the First Lady wrote. And it seems to me that your organization has failed. Well, when the Daughters of the American Revolution failed to respond, the president's wife withdrew from the organization, and she did not go quietly. Her exit made headlines around the world. I had become the center of the storm, and I was very uncomfortable with it all. I decided to hide in my hotel room and refuse to answer the phone. But if I would not rise up in my own defense, Mrs. Roosevelt and the Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Ickes, would. The president himself, who I assumed had more important things on his mind, returned to the nation's capital to assist in my concert planning. I don't care if she sings from the top of the Washington Monument, as long as she sings. Slowly, quietly, I began to accept the fact that I had become a symbol representing my people and my country. I knew the choice was mine, and I knew I had to sing.